Welcome to Birdsong. I'm your host, Caiyu, and in this episode, we have my brother from the same mother, Mother Earth, that is, Andrew Askaripour, joining us in conversation. So, Andrew and I spent some time together when we were up in the high Andes mountains of Peru in the Sacred Valley a couple of years ago, drinking the sacred ancestral cactus medicine Huachuma. And we drank this medicine together in a couple of locations. And I might tell a little bit of a story here before I get into Andrew's bio and the heart of our show because it ties into our friendship. So, one of these times was beside this beautiful flowing creek at the base of an ancient Pisac temple site, right around the very back, looking up at this big cave on the side of the mountain. And we lit a fire, we tuned in with the great grandfather medicine and all of our surrounds, and it was a really beautiful day. And another time, it was at La Casa de la Gringa, which Andrew states in the show, which is in Cuzco at the Temple of the Moon. And I remember this one particular journey. We went for a walk after spending most of the day in these absolutely stunning gardens. And I recall Andrew and I were walking next to each other, and I think we may have tuned in with each other because he was carrying some sacred chonta wood staves. And in Amazonian medicine culture, these wooden staves made of chonta wood, which is a really hard, dark wood, are seen as a totem of protection. And I think I myself had a chonta wood staff with me with a beautiful piece of quartz crystal jutting up at the very top, which I still have and which traveled with me to many sacred sites over there in South America. One of which was plugged straight into the ground at the very top of Machu Picchu Mountain, the Axis Mundi, the central pillar between earth and sky. And it was charging up the crystal and the staff with all of this pure celestial energy while I was drinking Huachuma medicine with one of my teachers, Don Cucho. But that's a story for a whole nother time, perhaps. But alongside this chonta staff, I had a condor feather dangling in the breeze, secured tightly to my bag. And I recall Andrew asking how my medicine was or how I was. And all I can remember is replying something to the effect of deep. And I get this real ancient grandfather look on my face when I'm working with Huachuma a lot of the time, like an ancient cactus itself standing lonesome in the desert, or like an ancient stone face on the side of a mountain. And I remember sitting beside a creek when we went for this walk, which was an ancient portal site, and I was whisked away down these waters to this luminescent rainbow temple site that was kind of like plasma, jellyfish, fluid-like dimensions, where I met with an old Andean medicine man and received a blessing. And look, anyway, after we get to this top of this peak, after the spending time at the creek, in the distance we see Apu Azongate, this sacred mountain. And on the way to the top and at the top, I'm taking big breaths, like full, deep lungs, and it still felt like I wasn't getting enough oxygen. And it wasn't until 5, 10, 15 minutes went by, and I ended up saying to one of the guys, I've got to get back down to the garden. I need the oxygen tank. And what had happened was that the altitude had got to me, even though I had been in Cuzco for about 6 days prior and had already drunk Huachuma a couple of days before that. So there I was in this deep in the middle of this Huachuma journey in the late afternoon, sitting in the shade at the back of this garden in a rickety old chair by myself with an oxygen mask over my face. And look, it was disconcerting and uncomfortable to say the least, but after some oxygen and plenty of sugar, I stabilized after a couple of hours. And I tell this story, one, because it's connected to how Andrew and I first met and spent some time together, and we obviously stayed connected over the years. And two, because this work with sacred medicines can carry risks, whether it's physiological or psychological. They're certainly not substances to be taken lightly. They are sacred medicines to be respected and to be engaged with in a respectful manner. But anyway, I could go on and on with interesting medicine stories, but let me introduce Andrew. So, Andrew Askaripour, also known as Fifth. He is born of Jamaican and Iranian descent, and he is a creative artist from Long Island, New York, who sheds light on his experiences in the world through varying mediums of expression. He has a really strong passion for photography, record production, cinematography, plant medicine ceremonies, ancient wisdom, and various spiritual practices. And he's all about documenting and creating genuine art that inspires others to walk a path of remembrance towards rediscovering their life's purpose and their inner calling. He's also the host of the newly published podcast, Masters of Ceremony, where he focuses on the topics of hip-hop, photography, shamanism, self-development, ancestral wisdom, health and wellness, and more. Let's get straight into it. I trust that you will find value in our dialogue to carry with you on your own path forward. Andrew Askaripour, welcome to the show, my brother. So great to have you on after you so graciously invited me to be a guest on your show, the Masters of Ceremony podcast, not that long ago. And I would love to have you share a little bit more about that. And that's something for sure that we will touch on. But as you know, the invitation is unfurling as I speak when it comes to sharing something in the name of honoring the sacred and opening up our intentional conversation together. So I would love to offer the space up to you, my brother.
Of course, brother. Thank you so much for having me on. It's beautiful to get to exchange roles and for myself to be the one to be interviewed yet again. It's really an honor. And let me just say before we formally open up space that I am a genuine fan and supporter of your show. I think maybe there's only one episode I haven't heard yet, but I've been up to date with almost every single one, and you're doing great work, brother.
Yeah, I appreciate that, man.
Yeah, so in light of my podcast and also yours, I do think it is so important, and I appreciate so much that you have this practice of asking your guest to open up space on the episode. And for me, I would like to keep it pretty simple with a prayer of gratitude. I would like to thank Great Spirit for bringing us together, for allowing us to have this meeting and enjoy a conversation with each other, but also hopefully provide insight and value to whoever is listening today, tonight, whenever people get to listen to this program. I want to give a prayer of gratitude to my ancestors, those who have walked before me and who have paved the way, in a sense, to allow me to be here today with you on this show. I would love to thank all those who have supported me so far on my personal path, my parents, my brothers, my teachers, my elders, my friends, my partner, and would deeply like to thank you, brother Caiyu, for all of the work that you're doing. It's more than needed during these times, and I pray that you can continue to do this beautiful work and that you and I can continue to have conversations that don't only nourish you and I, but all of those who need a little bit of content that they can relate to. I think that's one of the most beautiful things that I've been receiving through your shows and that people have been receiving through my shows is that certain people have let me know that, hey man, I haven't heard anything like this out there, and it's giving me a lot of inspiration, motivation, and encouragement to be my most authentic self. So may this conversation flow clearly. May we speak from the heart, and it's an honor to be on, brother.
Beautiful, brother. A really heartfelt way to open up our dialogue together. Thank you. So from the get-go, let's name the general trajectory that we both want this dialogue to head in the direction of. And that is this greater theme that we were both speaking to before we were actually having this conversation. And that theme is one of finding one's voice, the internal voice that guides us to our higher sense of self, our soul path, our North Star, guiding us to what really matters, perhaps guiding us to the reason that we have incarnated on this planet, alongside our physical voice and the importance of being able to express ourselves, speak our truth, sing our song. And a large part of that journey for both of us has been, one, music, and two, sacred plant medicine in particular, or at least of particular importance within this dialogue, the sacred plant medicine known as Huachuma, the San Pedro Cactus. So I think a good place to start for us to build some context and to start trailing these ideas like we might trail paw print out in the wild, or the flittering of birdsong through lowland scrub.
Yes.
I would love for you to take us back through the ages to your origin story. Tell us about your upbringing, your journey into music, into consciousness, spiritual expansion, and perhaps any other key stepping stones up until the point where we happened to meet.
It would be my pleasure, brother. And like any other origin story, it can become incredibly long-winded. So I will do my absolute best to keep it succinct. But for me, I grew up in Long Island, New York, which is an island right off of the island of Manhattan. Pretty small island, but a pretty beautiful island. I've always been incredibly grateful to have that New York hustle and ambition and be able to spend time in the city, but also come back to a place that is much more entrenched within nature, and to just come home after a long day in the city and to be able to hear the crickets and the birds and all those beautiful creatures has been a really beautiful paradox and grounding for me in so many ways. So that paradox continues to rule through many aspects of my life. I am a son of two immigrants, my mother being from Jamaica, my father being from Iran, which is, to me, if I may say so, an incredibly unique mix, because I have yet to find another one out there. Someone who is half
No
Jamaican.
doubt.
Yeah, half Iranian. It's pretty eclectic. So growing up in a immigrant household and my brothers and I being first generation Americans definitely led us to have a different perspective on life than many others, because we knew that our direct ancestry was not from this land. We knew that our parents came from very different lands. And I would say for me, not so much at a young age, but eventually further down my life, that would actually play into the difficulty that I've experienced in finding my own voice. Having these two different regions that are so opposite in many ways and very, very similar in many ways certainly helped shape me into who I am today. So just some general context of growing up. I'm the youngest of 5 sons. My parents had 5 boys, and I looked up to my 4 older brothers my entire life. They were a pretty wild bunch, but also a creative and very expressive bunch. And growing up, my household was incredibly fun. I actually always felt very protected. I wasn't the little brother who got bullied that much because I was so small and so much younger than everybody else. And I was always very observant as a child. And I would say this is one of those natural essences that I believe everyone is born with. My mother always told me I was a calm baby. I didn't cry much. I didn't whine much. Growing up as a toddler, I always remember looking up in a sense. And now as an adult, I see that it was very metaphorical in a way. But I was always looking up to everyone who was older than me, trying to see what I could learn from them, and always quietly observing. So being in the position within my siblings as the youngest provided me an immense opportunity to observe, to learn from my brothers' successes, to learn from their mistakes, to learn from their interests, to learn from their passions. And it wasn't long before I became entrenched within everything that my brothers were loving. So that was things like hip hop music, skateboarding. I mean, you can imagine, I'm not sure how much you or your listeners know about New York culture, but in New York, there's something for everybody, as people can imagine. And growing up in New York and being of that culture allowed me to be exposed to so many different beautiful ways of life. And I would say one of the most pivotal moments in my life was being introduced to the music and the culture of hip hop. And I think I was 7 or 8 years old when I really recognized that there was something special about this music compared to just some of the other stuff I was hearing on the radio. And I was always a real like techie kid. So when computers came about and the internet was out, I wasn't getting my hip hop music from the radio. I was getting it from, sites like LimeWire and those other sites where you illegally download music, or all those early sites, and CDs as well. My brothers had CDs and cassettes. And I think that allowed me to be introduced to the original essence of hip hop, which is all centered around education, love, peace, gathering, speaking about the struggles that one goes through in a poetic manner. Much different than the mainstream music that most people are exposed to today, and even in the late 90s when things began to shift a bit. And I would say hip hop provided me a certain language and a certain way of interacting with this reality that was a lot more rich than everything else I was being exposed to going to school and being around the people I grew up with. And as I said, my brothers were a big influence in all this. They were breakdancing and skateboarding and really into the culture, and doing graffiti, getting arrested for graffiti, being super just rebellious in that way, which was so fun to observe. And I would eventually go down that same path and find myself in some trouble at some point in my teenage years. But hip hop for me really served as medicine. It served as a life path. And just listening, I would spend hours and hours and hours listening to so much various music. And what really attracted me most to this culture, this art form, was the storytelling aspect of it. There were so many incredible stories being told in these raps. And I just wanted to learn more. I would get hooked on a certain artist like Nasir Jones from Queensbridge, my favorite rapper of all time. I would get so deeply embedded within to the rhymes that he was sharing that described his bedroom, described his neighborhood, described the things that his father was going through, which led to the way he raised him to speak about the struggles of growing up in a poverty-stricken area. All of these little windows from different musicians served as teaching moments for me. And I really looked at these artists, and I still look at some of these musicians today as teachers of mine. And I knew at an early age that something relating to music was something I wanted to do with my life. And when I became into my later teen years, just being in the streets of Long Island and going to the city, I got really deeper and more hands-on onto hip hop culture. I wasn't only listening at that point; I was participating in the culture of just being a wild adolescent. I would say that I have certainly tamed myself in recent years over the past decade, but I was definitely a bit of a rebellious person, but always a peaceful and calm person, as I've stated. And also, just to reiterate something else that I wanted to mention was growing up in my household, I had my Jamaican grandmother living with me, and she was raising me as well. And as Malidoma Patrice Somé states, the importance of the relationship between grandparent and grandchild is it's incredibly important. It's hard to even state how important it is and how special that connection is for the proper development of a child. Because as Malidoma says, the child and the grandparent are each closest to the other side of this life. And being so, they have certain lessons and relatability that they can share with one another. So even during my wild teenage years, having my grandmother there in the house as a grounding energy, and growing up hearing stories about uh, spiritual stories and religious stories from Jamaica, all of that definitely did tilt my perspective towards a metaphysical understanding of things. And yeah, my teenage years were really beautiful. And I eventually reached a point where I went away to college, and I actually experienced what you would call, or what I would call, a health crisis of sorts. I was having severe gastric issues, stomach issues. Although I had immigrant parents who certainly knew how to cook traditional meals, I grew up on the traditional American diet because I was very stubborn. I was a picky eater. And my mom always used to say to me, after years of being fed up trying to feed me healthy food, she eventually said one day, I'll never forget, she said, "One day you're going to pay for this. And you're going to reap what you sow," regarding not eating from the land, essentially, or at least eating healthier food. And that day certainly came. I reached a point where it was very difficult for me to digest any food. I was burping up undigested food. And it reached a point where I knew something needed to change. Thankfully, I had older brothers who were vegetarians and who had done fasting for regenerative and restorative purposes. And I just decided one day when I was 19 years old that I was going to go on a 3-day fast. This was my first time ever, had no concept of the science behind fasting, had no concept behind the religious and spiritual traditions of fasting. I just knew that my stomach needed a reset and that my body needed a break. And at that time, I was working in a pizza shop. And being from New York, pizza was like my favorite food. And doing this 3-day fast, delivering pizzas, brother, oh man, you could only imagine how how difficult and tempting it was. And but I did make it. I did make it the full 3 days, the full 72 hours. I only drank some tea and maybe a green juice here or there. And after that, I tried to eat meat once again, thinking, I fixed myself. I fasted for 3 days. That's it. I tried to eat some meat. Body was not accepting it. I decided, okay, let me just give this a try of going vegetarian. I did another fast a couple months later in November of 2014, where I did a 10-day fast. And this was a moment in my life where I can say I was having a true spiritual awakening from going through this health crisis. And I don't know what prompted me to say that I'm going to do a 10-day fast. I have not done a 10-day fast since then, and that was almost 10 years ago. But that experience really shifted my life's course in such a dramatic way. It was around the same time I was getting into Eastern philosophy. I was still entrenched within hip hop, but I began to want to study other sources from other traditions that could give me a new insight on my reality, on my perspective. And I was getting into float tanks. I was reading a bunch of Sri Ramana Maharishi, and really just felt an awakening and shift of sorts that I really enjoyed, and a sense of clarity and release of brain fog that was life-changing, to say the least. And I finished that 10-day fast. I became a vegan after that. I was vegan for about 5.5 years, which I am no longer. But those initial changes in my physical health certainly led to a spiritual reemergence to ascend from the depths of myself, and an ancient memory, I would say, to be remembered of understanding that there's much more than meets the eye. And I would say all of this awakening through college, through the process of creating a hip hop album called The Fifth Tape, which I started in college and finished in 2019. It was a 5-year process of making this hip hop album of my own, which I was serving as an executive record producer and audio engineer to. That process had a deep initiation aspect to it, of course, and maybe we can get into that a little bit later. But at the end of my college years, as I was still in the thick of making this album, I graduated college. I was in that state many Americans experience when you graduate college, but you haven't got a job yet, and you kind of feel a little bit lost. And at this point in my life, I kind of transcended the Eastern philosophies and exchanged that for deeper traditions into herbalism, shamanism, animism, ethnobotany, South American culture, North American, Native American culture. And I had my head in a book for the entire winter of 2016 and 2015 going into 2016. And I was reading a lot of Terence McKenna and Richard Evans Schultes and all these other ethnobotanists, Mark Plotkin and Wade Davis. And just one day, something popped into my head like, maybe you want to try that ayahuasca stuff that you've read about. And I had known about it since I was in high school, actually, but I had never any interest in it. And I, felt an attraction, and I researched some places where I can maybe drink this strange medicine that I honestly didn't know too much about. And I found a retreat center in Ecuador, and it had hundreds of reviews, which I liked. It seemed pretty well vetted. I enjoyed that it wasn't in Peru because, of course, me wanting to be different, I was saying to myself, everyone goes to Peru. Everyone goes to the jungles. I want to go to the mountains. And in December of 2016, I went down to Ecuador, had my first experiences with ayahuasca and San Pedro, and basically the rest was history from there. I fell in love with plant medicine. I fell in love with ceremony. As I stated on yours and I's podcast when you were on my show, when I was in ceremony, I felt like I returned home. I had a deep nourishment that I had not felt in many years. And it just all made so much sense to me, especially being a child, as I stated, who was always incredibly observant. I could see how some of those skills actually related to understanding energy within a ceremony, understanding how and why there is such a regimented practice and guidelines within these ceremonies. And I loved it so much. I had such a healing experience there that I vowed that I would come back a year later and work at this retreat center for half a year or so. And I ended up doing that. I came back a year later, went to Peru first, and that is where you and I met at Casa de la Gringa at Temple of the Moon during a Huachuma ceremony. So pretty long-winded, but that's basically my life in a nutshell up to when you and I met.
An expansive journey. And I'm smiling and nodding my head and laughing along the way as there are so many parallels with my own journey. The healing crisis and initiation into descent to come to know myself on a deeper level, to develop the intuitive capacity within my body of listening to my body, having my head stuck in books for long periods of time, the plant medicine, and having all of these elements play their role so I could tap into this greater sense of myself. And when you were speaking, it seemed kind of like a linear progress. Like, okay, you started fasting, you were initiated into an awakening experience, and it sounds like it snowballed on from there. But for me, the rock and roll, the punk rock lifestyle was really pulling very, very heavily, while there was an element of soul trying to come through and trying to awaken at the same time. But I kept getting sucked back into that world. And that was happening for quite a long time, ebbing and flowing. And it was also really interesting to hear you speak about hip hop and your experience of it being so enmeshed in a culture of education and love. Because while I was growing up, I listened to a lot of pop and pop punk, while also listening to some artists that would fit into the genre of what I would call hip hop. And from my perspective, hip hop has long been associated, at least in the mainstream eye perhaps, with, well, I'm not really sure how to articulate it accurately or honestly or respectfully, but let's put it like this. I grew up listening to artists like Dr. Dre, Eazy-E, Snoop Dogg, Eminem, a bunch of those cats. And what I certainly picked up on was the scent of rebellion that you were speaking to, rebelling against a lot of things, cultural norms, societal norms. But I was always very aware that there was a plethora of vulgar lyrics and language enmeshed within what I was listening to.
100%.
Yeah, look, so without being able to articulate too much of it myself, because I'm not enmeshed within the hip hop community and I never have been enmeshed in that community, but I would love to hear you riff on some of the rift or the chasm, the difference, or maybe it's the evolution, or maybe just different branches within hip hop. And well, with what some might articulate as derogatory language and its vulgar content throughout the hip hop scene and hip hop music. But then I also get the scent of this style of hip hop that serves to uplift and awaken consciousness through its lyrical prowess.
Yes, completely. The latter is the essence of hip hop for sure. And just to say one thing before I even focus on that is that my journey was definitely circuitous in so many ways. It was certainly not as linear as the origin story I laid out was, but I've certainly had many, many ups and downs and 1 foot in, 1 foot out experiences. But to your point and to what you are articulating clearly, I understand completely, is the simple fact that what most people are exposed to when it comes to hip hop music, especially if they're of an international crowd, because hip hop originated in New York, up in the Bronx. So for those who may not be from the birthplace of this culture, or for those who may be from an entirely different culture, usually what they are first and most exposed to is what is shared on the radio, what we can call hip hop, or just basic rap music, which usually tends to be a little bit less meaningful and substantial in intention, and a little bit more geared to inciting a response or invoking just high energy. Some of the things you may hear in certain records of just, you're hearing a lot of vulgarity. But the real crux of the matter is just that what many people are exposed to is a very surface level exposure to hip hop music. And when you actually spend a little bit of time into doing the history of this culture and listening to some of the earliest records onwards to what is referred to as the golden era of hip hop, which is the early 90s into the mid 90s, it doesn't take long to see that this was a music of education. This was a culture that actually transcended music. Hip hop has various different pillars within it, and the rapping is only one. The DJing and the production is one. The breakdancing aspect of it is one. The beatboxing aspect of it in the early ages is one. The cipher of being in a circle together, which we will allude to later, is another. another, and it's unfortunate that many people only get a surface level exposure to it. But to your point as well, when it comes to the vulgarity and sometimes the aggression, it is akin to any other genre of music or movie or anything that relays a message through a certain means that may come off as aggressive or as hard or as what is the word I'm looking for, gangster. But that is only a delivery method of a certain message. And I think hip hop is difficult for many people to understand because it is such a lyric based music genre. I would say it is the most lyric based music genre. And if your ear is not trained, it can be incredibly difficult to actually catch what is being said, what is being expressed. And not only that, not to be too long winded again, but not only that, there is such a deep slang aspect to hip hop music. Certain songs from certain artists you will not be able to understand unless you are from the culture or that area from which the artist is from. And because of these little missing gaps in people's understanding comes the practice of filling in those gaps with assumptions. So that's been one of my life paths. That's been a role that I have been in since I was a young teenager, was showing people really dope, really beautiful, really powerful hip hop. And it's something that led me to want to create my hip hop album as well, to show that this music is beautiful. It's not all what the media makes it out to be.
Yeah, that's nice to have you articulate that and to gain a clear perspective on hip hop culture and where this tiny little slice of hip hop culture that I was listening to fits into the greater scheme of things. And it's interesting to trail these similarities between hip hop culture and plant medicine and sacred ceremony and honoring the sacred. Because when you spoke to the Cypher or the breakdancing, what we see is a lot of people gathered in circles. And
Yes.
we've been gathering in circles for a long time. That is etched into the marrow of our bones. That's for I've been thinking about the sacred circle lately, and I just mused on this in a recent video in regards to how many places and how many traditions the sacred circle shows up as a symbolic representation of life, the cycles of life, the changing of the seasons, the revolutionary nature of the cosmos, the galaxies, the celestial bodies, the teachings of no beginning, no end, the timelessness, the cyclical nature of all things. And we find it infused into so many aspects of our ancestry. There's, the meaning is infused into the sacred drum and how its echo reverberates in concentric circles out into the cosmos. It's in the medicine wheel that we know from that we primarily know from First Nations Native American tradition, but the concept of the wheel and it used in a medicine way is certainly not exclusive to Native American culture. It's found in many nature-based cultures all around the world. There's the stone circles, there's the mandalas, there's the meaning that is etched into the very structure of the teepee, the sweat lodge, the temazcal, the ring of rocks around the sacred fire.
My
So
favorite.
in all the esoteric, yeah, for sure. The esoteric and the shamanic symbologies. And, when I was thinking about this and thinking about our conversation coming up, I was thinking about how you see these artists and rappers standing in the circle, the hip hop cipher, the freestyle rap. Everyone's huddled around, and there's something very ancient and primordial about the circle, about gathering in circle. And what I essentially want to circle back around to is how hip hop allowed you to find your own voice, and not just hip hop, but the intersection of hip hop and plant medicine, because there's something very universal that we're touching on here when it comes to gathering in circle, shamanic plant medicine, and the journey of being able to find one's own voice. So there's many different avenues that we can go down, but what I want to ask you is what comes to mind first and foremost when we're talking about these themes and the intersection between them all?
Beautiful, brother. What comes to mind right away is what the word cipher means and how it originates in a hip hop context. And in mathematics, cipher represents zero, or the 0 point. And the 0 is obviously a circle. And everyone is of equal distance to the center of a circle when they are on the perimeter. And to me, that is such a beautiful piece of symbolism of a unifying factor when people gather in a circle. I think that is the essence of why, as you allude to, it is so ancient and so powerful, this practice, because it immediately creates a sense of equanimity and feeling of being unified together when joined in this circle. And for me, the way hip hop relates to the plant medicine path, and not only the plant medicine path, but the ceremonial path into shamanism, into animism, into understanding that everything is sacred, is that for me, hip hop exposed me to my first psychedelic experiences, as I've stated on a previous podcast. I experienced states of what I can only describe as pure trance in a completely sober state. I'm doing air quotes for those who are only listening, but states of pure trance where I was moved to tears, moved to tremors within my body, of being so moved by the music and the lyrics. What hip hop provided to me was that there are ways of shifting one's own state and raising one's own consciousness through means outside of ingesting anything physical, just through practices of listening to a drum, listening to someone speak a beautiful prayer or poem. And that is why I say, when I entered this ceremonial path, it felt so familiar. It felt like I was home, because I had already been experiencing states within a circle of peers that led me to similar experiences. And of course, I became totally infatuated with shamanism and plant medicine work, because it completely had a different aspect that I can't say hip hop also had completely, but that unifying factor of being able to reach states within oneself that you may not have thought were possible, just through the means of music, prayer, gathering, vulnerability, creating a sacred space, was what was so familiar to me. And as I continue down this path, I see the parallels between hip hop music and music in general and ceremonial work in so many different ways. I mean, that could be an entire podcast of its own. But that's what comes to mind when you bring up all that.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the greatest teachers for both of us when we are tying in the sacred plant medicine ceremonial path, as we touched on, it's Huachuma. And this is something that I would love to explore in many different aspects with you, because for myself, this has been a fundamental ally, such a significant, I don't know if I can say role model, but it certainly has played a significant role along my path when it comes to finding my voice and being able to express myself and come to know myself on a very, very deep level. Of course, there are other sacred plant medicines too, but Huachuma has really paved the path to some very, very deep teachings, and not just teachings, but kind of like a a key in lock. It's really opened up these worlds for me to be able to anchor what it was that I was learning in these altered states of consciousness, these trance states, these otherworldly states that I was exploring, being able to anchor that into my physical body and really embody a lot of those teachings. So Huachuma, for anyone that doesn't know, for anyone who is listening that doesn't know what Huachuma is, it's also known as the San Pedro Cactus. It's a very, very fast growing cactus native to the Andean mountains of South America, such as Peru, Ecuador. And this cactus contains a number of psychoactive alkaloids, one of which is mescaline, which a lot of people are most familiar with. And mescaline is also found in its cactus cousin, peyote. And mescaline is probably most well known due to Aldous Huxley's work and his detailed experiences of mescaline through his book, The Doors of Perception, which I believe was produced and released back in the 1950s. And there have been many other accounts of mescaline and these mescaline containing plant medicines, but at least this is perhaps the most notable or most well known, we might say, westernized account of this particular way of communing with plant medicines. So it's a sacred medicine, it's a teacher plant, it's heart opening, it's a consciousness expanding plant ally that has been used for more than 4,000 years throughout the ancient pre-Columbian civilizations of the Central Andes. And, while I could keep going on and on about it, what I would love to know about or hear you speak about is your relationship to this plant medicine and how it has assisted you in this greater theme of what we're talking about, which is finding your voice.
Beautiful, brother. This is something that lights me up so much because, similar to, as you've stated, Huachuma, San Pedro, Aguacoya, to me, certainly is a role model and has been ever since I met this plant teacher. And to circle back to one thing, I stated that back when I first wanted to get into plant medicines, I had the call to ayahuasca. But previous to that, I had a deep calling to peyote. And I had a not so easy time finding somewhere where I could experience this plant medicine at all, which eventually led me to be interested in going down to South America to experience ayahuasca instead. So when I went down to Ecuador for the first time to experience ayahuasca, San Pedro Cactus was something that was being offered at this retreat center as well, in a very ancient, specifically Andean way of serving this medicine. And it was something that I actually didn't have too much of an attraction to whatsoever. But upon my first ceremony with this medicine, I can only describe as a truly core shifting and awakening moment with this teacher. I would say, not to mix terms because we're speaking in an Andean sense, but I certainly had what people would describe as a Kundalini awakening of sorts, I guess, because the sensations felt when I first met this medicine was extreme tremors throughout the lower back, going upwards the spine to my crown. And I was shaking as much as somebody would if they were butt naked in the freezing cold. The people next to me were actually visibly not bothered, but curious about why this young man with dreadlocks was shaking so much. And what was happening to me, and I will not share the entire story of what happened because some of it is so personal to me, but in a nutshell, what happened was a sensation of feeling such a deep sense of ancient wisdom that there was no experience of time. There was a sensation of understanding just how old this intelligence is, and it was overwhelming in the most beautiful of ways. And I will share a piece of the vision I had, but as you know, Not everyone associates visionary experiences with San Pedro, but with a strong enough brew and with a medicine man or woman who prepares the medicine in a very certain way, you can certainly reach very strong visionary states. And as I was feeling the ancient memory and ancient wisdom of this cactus, I had a vision of myself in the desert. And I feel this feeling of my brothers being there with me. And I look over to my right to look at one of my brothers, and I see a San Pedro cactus. And I look to my left, and I see another San Pedro cactus. And I look down at my body, and I was a San Pedro cactus. 100%. There wasn't an idea of Andrew seeing himself as a cactus. I was the cactus. And I felt like I was embodying all of the wisdom that was inherent within this sacred medicine. And after that ceremony, I felt such a deep mix of feelings regarding remembrance and also shame. And I'll say why I felt shame a bit. And that's because I felt like I had remembered something that was so ancient within me, but I also felt shame that I had never thanked this energy that has been dwelling within inside me my entire life, and that I had never thought about all of the ancestors up my lineage who lived and sacrificed their lives for me to be here today. And understanding not only that they provided me with so much light and so much of my essence, but also provided me with certain things that have been carried throughout my ancestry that need to be healed. And this, I would say, is what helped me begin to find my voice, something that I'm still doing today. But regarding the origin of this musing and this question, my voice began to emerge in a different sense after this experience of meeting San Pedro, because I felt like I was no longer alone in my spiritual path. Previous to this, I very much had a strong relationship with God, whatever term you want to call it, but I will say God or creator. And I certainly, as I was saying, I certainly had a very, very close relationship to the idea of God and had always felt supported. But I had never felt the true presence of guides or ancestors working their way to help me in many ways. And due to this, I felt like I had not only found my voice, but also their voice. And that was very encouraging to me. The medicine also gave me a deep sense of courage, and it also was incredibly grounding to me, which is exactly what I needed at that point in my life. I was definitely engaging in practices and lifestyles that were just filling me up with too much air and not feeling grounded whatsoever. Actually, maybe getting too deep into states of meditation where I felt like my etheric body was flying outside of myself, and my physical body that I needed to take care of was actually starting to lose some of its vitality. And San Pedro cactus completely grounded me. As you know, you've cultivated, or at least have seen some of these cacti. They don't even really have deep roots. The roots don't go that far down. And to me, when I look at that, it seems like those little ends of a battery that simply only need a little bit of connection to receive all the juice, all the energy. And for me, that was just so beautiful to understand how it grew. I really consider it what I call electric medicine. It helps rewire the nervous system in many ways for myself. It helps rewire certain mental patterns. And it certainly, in a nutshell, gave me the courage and understanding to simply speak what was on my heart and soul a lot more, because I felt like I had gained an ally. I felt like I had not only a role model, but someone there with me, pushing me to share more of myself. So I'm not sure if you have experienced any of the same sensations with this medicine, but I can certainly say that's how it's been for me.
After diving very, very deep with this particular medicine, yes, I have experienced many of those things on many occasions. And just to touch on a little bit more of the core, or maybe the fundamentals of what this cactus experience entails, I think it's important for us to mention that this cactus experience lasts a long time.
Yes.
8 to 12 hours plus, but in a sense, time dilates profoundly and it can really feel like living a lifetime or perhaps even multiple lifetimes in one day.
Yes.
And in contrast to what many people consider to be the feminine energy of ayahuasca, Huachuma, for most people, has a fundamentally masculine energy. And I tend personally to make the difference that ayahuasca really grabs our sense of self and catapults us into these cosmic vistas of the spirit world where everything is incredibly foreign. And I make a distinction between that and Huachuma for me and a lot of other people, where Huachuma tends to open the gates of heaven in a different way. And those gates of heaven tend to be, for a lot of people, connected to the earth in a very, very deep way, experiencing the intelligence and the aliveness and the richness of all that is around us. And part of that as well, part of the magic of that is being able to move around, whereas during ayahuasca, you're typically not moving around all that much. But
Yeah.
Huachuma, there certainly is the potential to move around and really work with the medicine on a different level. It's kind of like a mentorship in one sense, like the great grandfather saying, "Come on, son, I'm going to teach you a few things, but
Yes.
it's your choice how deeply you want to be involved in the teachings, because you can take it many, many different ways." And something that I wanted to circle back to was when you mentioned that you had initially experienced Huachuma in this very Andean way of working with the medicine. And to tie this back in with finding one's voice, was there elements of that ceremonial ritualistic practice that encouraged you to speak during ceremony while you were under the effects of Huachuma, or was this something that came and developed later?
Yes, without a doubt, you are spot on, brother. This specific tradition, this specific ceremony held by this specific medicine man who is from the Andes. Admittedly, it is a little bit, what is the term, avant-garde compared to some of the other ancient Huachuma ceremonies from the Andes. But yes, everybody had a time to speak. Every single person who was in the circle had a moment to speak directly to the medicine man and directly to everyone who was there. And to do that in front of a sacred fire, in front of 30 plus people, while you're on the medicine, while your heart is wide open and you're feeling your most vulnerable, is 100% a catalyst to learning how to find your voice. And this form of ceremony, which I've come to see varies very much differently than many others, was very empowering in the circle for everyone who was there to find their voice and to share what was most important on their heart in the moment. And for me, when I think about one's own voice, I usually think about the things people want to say but don't say because they have some type of fear of rejection. They want to fit in. They don't want to ruffle any feathers. They want to be accepted by everybody. I so much relate to this. This has been
For sure.
it has been such a reoccurring theme in my life. And we got to let go of all that, man. It's not that complex. It's as simple as realizing that there are things that want to emerge from the wellspring of your depths that need to emerge, unless or else there will be a massive blockage which will eventually overflow in some type of malignant energy that is not as easy to heal compared to simply speaking what is on your mind in the moment. So this is not something that I have mastered. This is not something that I would even say I have become incredibly comfortable with. But the practice of speaking what is on the surface of my heart is a practice that has given me so much nourishment and so much healing. And also, when I think about finding your own voice, we usually speak about it in this way that you and I are speaking about it, regarding finding our own voice. But something San Pedro showed me specifically with this medicine was that when you begin to open up and clear away some of those weeds in your garden, as you like to state, you find yourself becoming a mouthpiece for other energies that cannot speak in the same way as we do. You find yourself becoming a conduit of transmitting certain messages for your brothers and sisters who are on this human plane of existence that carries a message from something that may be non-human or someone who is non-living. So this process for me of finding your voice comes with carrying the voices of many other energies. And specifically with Huachuma, I would say that I became Huachuma's number one advertiser. I completely just couldn't stop talking about how beautiful this medicine was and is for me. And beyond that, and this leads to something I want to share with you, I felt a deepened sense of responsibility. And that responsibility was that there are traditions, there are ceremonies, there are ways of living and being aware that many people have carried for millennia that is being forgotten today. And I want to be someone who helps people remember. I want to be someone who carries some of these traditions, or at least carries the essence that they can provide to others. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but in many ceremonies, at least in the Andes that I've partaken from and learned from various teachers and friends, specifically in peyote ceremonies of the north as well, but also in Huachuma ceremonies, the medicine man or woman is always facing east. So if they're having a nighttime ceremony, you can see the morning sun rise within the passageway, the gates of heaven, the door of the sacred space. And recently I was meditating on the direction of the east and meditating on that feeling you have after a long San Pedro ceremony. As you stated, I've been in ceremonies actually that have lasted up to 23 hours in Ecuador, which is unreal. But on musing on that, I had a poem flow through me that maybe I can share with you if you feel open to it.
Would love to hear it. Absolutely.
Okay, beautiful. I do not have it memorized yet, so I will read it from my journal.
And just to say, while you're finding your page as well,
please,
I'm sure many of us have heard of the old cliche saying that the one thing that people fear most, aside from death or dying, is public speaking.
Oh,
so it really goes to show just how enmeshed that fear is within our greater culture. And as you were speaking to, there's so many threads when we are touching on that, the fear of not saying the right thing, of looking or sounding like a goose, our mind going blank and not knowing what it is that we want to say, being judged, being ridiculed, being outcast. So, and that applies to whether we are sharing a speech, a lecture up on a stage, whether we are
Yes.
sharing in song, poetry, storytelling, and it could be in the flesh. It could be on a Facebook Live. It could be on a podcast. It's a very, very real thing for people, which obviously speaks to the necessity of being able to clear out any of these blockages that we are experiencing so we can express our truth from the deepest well springs of our heart, which you said before. Because if we are not expressing that, that stuff that gets buried deep down, and that manifests in a whole lot of physical and energetic issues.
Yes, completely. And I hope that even me sharing this poem can help alleviate that within myself and whoever others who feel this same sensation, because as you say, it is so commonplace. So yeah, this was written on the 29th of April of this year, after meditating on the direction of the east, where I will also say I was doing morning libations on arising every morning to the direction of the east. I got into this practice of just saying some prayers and offering some of my morning water to the direction of the east. And after doing that ritual one morning, this poem flowed through me. An offering to the east, the direction of our rebirth and of the morning light. The warmth of our star welcomes us after a long, grueling night. Prayers, songs, insights, and even moments of fright. The remembrance of our peace and also of our might. What was once doubted is now believed with conviction. And once again we are shown, in order to grow, we must only ask permission. From the depths of our souls, we easily understand this ancient wisdom. But there are moments where we become lost and confused, and in these times, we must simply listen. But the work does not end there, for you must apply what you have learned. A blessing is always a blessing, but it must still be earned. With great sacrifice and intent, our elders' fires continue to burn, knowing that one day they will have to rest, and it will indeed be our turn. So pay close attention and study your teachers. Know that they were once beginners as well, and at times too stumbled and fell. 4 years they humbled themselves, fasting on top of sacred mountains, hungry as hell. And with these meditations came immense revelations and an understanding that we walk this path of remembrance, not only for ourselves, but for the next 7 generations. To all my relations. Aho.
That's deep, brother. I can feel the essence of the daybreak star rising over eastern horizon coming through those words, and it speaks to exactly what you were saying before, that sometimes, a lot of the times, when we clear out the atmospheric fog that so often conditions us into certain ways of being or living or perceiving these patterns and programs that are unhealthy, dysfunctional, when we clear those clouds away, then we can come into this place of becoming more of a hollow bone, an empty chalice, a clear vessel, so that the more than human, other than human voices have a chance to speak through us. And it reminds me of the David Abram quote that I sent you when we were discussing what we wanted to riff on during our conversation. And he was touching on, what if meaningful speech is not an exclusively human possession? Like, what if the language that we speak now arose first in response to the animate world, as a reply to not just other humans, but of a living, breathing cosmos that already spoke to us in a myriad of tongues. And I feel like this poem, you can perhaps speak more to this, but I feel the essence of that coming through you. The voice of what it was that you were tapping into is flowing through you just so perfectly. And it's the mind of nature, the mind of earth, the mind of spirit, finding a passageway for its own life through your very own breath.
Yes. completely. And to that point, maybe something that will also illuminate how freely this poem flowed through me is that I was so excited with what I wrote after I wrote this poem. It was a complete surprise to me, and it did not take any effort whatsoever. It was one shot written all the way through, finished to beginning to end. And I was so excited about this poem that the following morning I tried to write another, and it just did not flow. I was completely trying to write from a center of, I am Andrew. I wrote this great poem yesterday. Let me try again. And I couldn't come up with anything because I was not allowing the soul or spirit of the message to arise within me and to flow out onto the page. I was simply wanting to create from a sense of being excited, which is perfectly all right, but there was a lack of depth there. And it made me understand exactly what you were saying, brother, that some of these messages, some of the most beautiful pieces of poetry or literature or song did not come from the individual only. It came from a space and a place that is beyond oneself. And it is something that I have been able to perceive and experience through ceremonial work, through the culture of hip hop, through these different ways of stepping out of the way of yourself, not creating a barrier between who you are and what the work wants to be, but simply reaching a state of peace and calm and comfortability, which allows something like that to flow through. And that is something I see you continuing to develop as well with everything you have been sharing online.
Yes, as Martin Shaw might put it, we need more stories, not from the landowners, but from the land itself, from the land speaking through us, from it telling us something about itself.
I couldn't agree more. That's beautiful. And to think this poem came from the direction of the East. That is the name of the poem. And an offering to the East, excuse me. But it came from the direction of the East. So, yes, the land spoke. And I think it's something that people should practice more. There's an amazing poet named Caiyu. He has some amazing podcasts with Aubrey Marcus. And he speaks about that everyone can write poetry and that everyone should write poetry, and that we have created this concept in the West and in modern times that you have to be a poet to write something poetic, or that it even has to be good. It should be used as a practice of play in my eyes. It always has been for me, and something I'm trying to continue to reiterate to myself of just give it a try. You never know what's going to come out onto the page. You never know if the land is going to decide to speak through you that morning. So it's something I'm working on myself completely, and something I encourage others to do as well.
Yeah, I might even suggest that poetry is an inherent element contained within the human condition, within our capacity to speak and write words, is this inherent ability to be able to create poetry. Again, circling back around, if only we get out of our own way and tap into the voice of nature. And there's just, I know that there's such a deep importance in what we're speaking to right now. And if we just hang on David Abram's words for a moment longer on this theme of human speech or meaningful speech not being an exclusively human possession, if we tease that out and expand that, what Abram is getting at is that the sounds that we make, the words we use, our voice, all of that, it all matters. It has a very real effect on the world around us, not just other people and quite obviously ourselves as well, but to the natural world. Our words carry frequencies. Our words carry meaning. And when we speak these frequencies, these meanings, we are sending them out into the earth, into the cosmos. And I mean, if we look to the ancient cultures, and we can circle back to Andean tradition here, since we were discussing Huachuma, there's the
Yes.
knowing that infusing your breath or your prayers into coca leaves, into tobacco smoke, and
Hmm.
using these as an offering, your there's perhaps a subtle but a very real effect at the unseen level of the natural world when it's carrying out offerings, prayers, infusing them with
Yes.
intention, with meaning, energy from the heart. It is a very significant aspect of cultivating right relationship with the land and being in right relationship with the land.
Yes, completely. I think it was either Brother Leon or maybe it was Dr. Martin Shaw. I think I heard the quote on your guys' episode, your and Leon's episode, or maybe it was something else you shared somewhere. But that the practice of sharing some of these words that come out onto the page or into the mind, but sharing these poems out loud within nature, that the poetry itself takes on a new life. The message itself continues to evolve, even if you're just repeating the same words. And that's obviously apparent when it comes to mantra chanting, when it comes to Ikaros or any other sacred songs or sacred chants.
Mm.
These songs, these words, these vocalizations have been being shared for thousands of years. And there's a reason why certain songs are not changed, because there is a direct effect. There is a direct result of these expressions. And yeah, I think it's something that we in the modern realm need to understand on a deeper level, to know that it's not only songs and poems, but also just everyday words. Hopefully, people, if they could realize this, maybe they would speak more kindly or compassionately to one another as well. Because, yes, of course, if you speak hurtful words to somebody, of course it hurts them. But who knows what it's doing to the surrounding? Who knows if the trees get upset when they hear a curse or some negative energy? Who knows if you're affecting other beings that are around? And it's why ceremony to me resonated so much when I begun walking this path. Because as you know, when you are in sacred space, when you are holding a sacred tobacco, it is of utmost importance that you watch not only what you say, but also what you think, because it is not merely believed, it is known that it is having an effect on the surroundings. And we can continue to muse on that, I'm sure, for an infinite amount of time, but that's what comes up within me when you express that.
Mm. One of the things that I would love to explore with you is diving into your own show, Masters of Ceremony, on a deeper level. So I would love for you to tell us a little bit about the show, and I would also love to know a little bit about how this journey has been in regards to you yourself finding and expressing your voice, and what kind of lessons and teachings you have learned within the nuances and complexities of being a show host and having to coordinate your thoughts and your voice and putting yourself out there to such a large community of people. So
Yes, thank you for that question, brother. Masters of Ceremony. I have wanted to create a podcast for, I would say, seriously, about 3.5 years now. Even while I was making my hip hop album, I had goals and dreams of creating a podcast. And ironically, which is another topic we can go very deep down, but I'm sure we won't in this episode, is the thing that held me up for quite some time was discovering a name for this show. I simply could not find a name that encapsulated both my hip hop roots and the roots that were emerging within me regarding to shamanism, plant medicine, and ceremonies. And I spent some time meditating on a name for this show. And when the name Master of Ceremonies eventually came to me, which is a long story in and of itself, which I won't share, I knew it was perfect because it tied into the idea of looking up towards some of the spiritual masters who lead ceremony in such a beautiful way, and also the original term of what an MC is. So I don't know if where you're from, people know that rappers are referred to as MCs. That term comes from a very archaic term, which is Master of Ceremonies. That term is at least documented to be at least 400 years old. A Master of Ceremonies sometimes is referred to someone who is just like a DJ or a host or prior to hip hop, but hip hop took on that name like till this day. If you are a true rapper, not just someone who, as we were saying earlier, speaks to superficial things and is just, cursing and talking about the typical money, women, and drugs. If you're someone who actually speaks their truth, then you only earn the title of MC. So for me, Masters of Ceremony had this understanding steeped within it. And I knew that everyone I was going to interview was going to have something valuable to share, regardless of where they were in their path. And that was the inspiration behind starting this podcast. Was, yes, it was for myself to express my voice more and share more of my story, but it was also to create and provide a platform for others to create and share their stories on air with me. And also, simply put, I think the same could be said for you. Podcasts changed my life. They served as a deep sense of education for me. I'm always someone who has driven a lot. I spend a lot of time in my car, being from Long Island, working in the city, sometimes 3, 4, 5 hours a day in the car at certain times. I know you experienced that as well when you would sometimes hold sacred space in certain places. You'd have to drive a long time. And this medium of podcasting was just so impactful and powerful for me. I said, why not? There's so much value I could receive from it. I'm going to create my own. And some of the things I've learned from this process, which I know you are learning as well, is one, how much sheer physical work goes into it. Thank God I went to school for audio engineering, and I am a videographer and photographer by profession. So being able to use my audio engineering skills and my video skills and my video editing skills has been so fun for me. It's given me an opportunity to use all of my gifts, not only my voice, but all of these other tactile gifts to create a show that is of, if I can say so myself, pretty good production value and comes off as professional and how I like to perceive and listen to podcasts. So I've learned so much about how much goes into this. I've learned so much from each interview I've done. I can even say that I have had my life changed from some of these interviews I have done. Let's say, for example, the one I did with you. Somebody commented under one of your posts, which came from a clip of our episode, about Bill Plotkin's work. And I was not familiar with Bill Plotkin whatsoever. Now his lectures and his book and his teachings have been providing me with so much guidance and nourishment. I can say that receiving that little suggestion has been life-changing in a sense. And I could only hope that what me and you are doing on this show and what I'm doing on my show continues to impact others in the same way.
Within the greater sphere of your life, and this is also inclusive of Masters of Ceremony, what's your mission and what's your message? Your overarching mission and your overarching message.
To borrow some language from Bill Plotkin, he speaks about having this mythopoetic title of oneself. And to give an example, for him, I believe during a vision quest, his name came to him, or his title came to him rather, and it was cocoon weaver. So someone who wraps these cocoons and creates a state of transition and transformation for someone. So for me, after hearing that, I started to think about, what is mine if I have one mythopoetic title? And for my entire life, something that I have not ascribed to myself, but that many others have, and which I would say I agree with, is I aim to always be a peacekeeper within any circle I am in. I do not like conflict, almost to the point where it has stunted my growth in many ways as an adult. I always prefer for things to be peaceful, but as I've grown into an adult and have matured, I've actually seen that that is a very sacred role to play, the peacekeeper, the level-headed one who can be calm in the time and space of chaos and of tragedy. So something that is an overarching mission of mine is to continue to provide balanced perspectives and tools and ways of conscious awareness that allow people to be grounded, or allow people to have a balanced perspective when they're going through a dark night of the soul. Because for me, I have been through some things in my life which I have not shared on this episode that have allowed me to understand just how important it is to have a stable, secure, confident, and grounded energy within oneself when in the midst of dangerous or violent situations. And I would also add to that another overarching mission of mine is to simply help people remember. I use the term remembrance so much, or the term path of remembrance so much, because that is what I am on. That is what we are both on. That is what so many of us in the collective are on, a path of remembrance. There's a deep state of amnesia of where we come from, what we are here to do. And if some way I can help even a few people remember while also continuing to remind myself, that is more than enough to me.
Yeah, that's beautiful. When you're speaking about being the peacekeeper, what comes to the forefront of my mind is how important some of these virtuous qualities that you're speaking to are, such as being able to stay grounded, centered, knowing how to navigate potentially violent or situations that have a lot of conflict infused within them. And what I'm trying to get at here is that there are there's obviously, or maybe not obviously, but there is an importance in having the capacity to know what to say, what words to use within these situations. And what I'm trailing here is, how does one know which voice is theirs? This is what I'm getting at. How does one know which voice is theirs? Because when we're getting up into the voices that come through in our mind, some people might have a way of articulating that as all thoughts come and go, just like emotions come and go, as if we were to envision the sky and the clouds passing through. So the clouds are constantly passing through, and sometimes there's thick, dense clouds, sometimes there's rain clouds, sometimes there's lightning and thunder, sometimes it's a picturesque blue sky and there's hardly any clouds at all. Sometimes there's just wispy little things that come in, and these things can be our thoughts and our emotions, and they may not necessarily be ours. We may be tapping into this stream of consciousness or these streams of thoughts that are just passing by within our window that we're perceiving through. So what would you say to someone that is like, well, I have, for a lack of better terminology, I have all these fucked up thoughts in my head. Like, how do I know which thoughts are mine and which thoughts are not? And how do I cultivate those thoughts into my voice? And how do I start to bring that through in a wholesome, harmonious manner?
Yes, great question. I love to get down to the practical side of things. And for me, it's not so much as what voice is mine or which voice is mine. It's more so, how is me expressing this thought, or how is me expressing these words going to affect myself and my surroundings?
Yes, that's a
So by
great way to
saying
put it.
that, yes, completely, because we can get caught up in this idea of possession. We can get caught up in this idea of what is mine, what isn't mine, especially when it comes to dark thoughts. And also sometimes when it comes to egoic thoughts of believing you're a savior, or the complexes that come with that. It goes on both sides of the spectrum. But to me, for anyone curious, and for myself, of when I've been curious about, where is this voice coming from? Is this me, or is this another aspect of this creation? I try my best to think about the result that is going to be had by thinking these thoughts and expressing these words. I think that is fundamentally more important than whether it is our own or not, because at the end of the day, think about all the times people have had light bulb experiences where something entered and then they could say it was theirs, but where did it come from to start with? Um, just for example. And I think many times another indicator is if the result is something that is going to be uh, obviously negative, such as to hurt somebody in a way that is unnecessary, or to hurt yourself, or an animal, or the environment, that usually that's coming from a place of fear or scarcity, and it is usually coming from the small ego of defense and of wanting to protect one's own uh, small self, I guess I can say. So that's what I would offer. I would offer people to think before they speak. There's a teaching which I do not remember in this moment, ironic because I'm all about remembrance, but there's a very simple practice of asking yourself a couple questions before you do or say anything. And some of those questions are, is this going to positively impact somebody or myself? Is this necessary to even express? And is this truthful? I think those are the three questions. And not to tell people also, this is a very important point that I want to add as well, is that sometimes being truthful, being honest, speaking what's on your soul may hurt somebody else, but it all comes down to the intention. It all comes down to the why of why I'm saying this, and if it is coming from your most authentic self and not simply the small self.
Mm. And I love what you were touching on there about stopping, pausing to think before speaking. And it's so cliche and it seems so obvious, but it is something that so many people do not stop and do. And it's something that I still cultivate and will always be cultivating to greater and greater degrees. Sometimes I'll have my moments and I feel like I am very, very present and tapped into this place, which I call the deep reservoir of stillness, from which everything arises and from which everything returns back to this place of silence, this place of stillness, and being able to tap into that and feel into what wants to emerge from that space. It brings such a great degree of the sacred into our living, breathing experience of reality, because we're being so mindful, so conscious of what it is that wants to arise and be expressed through us. But then on the other hand, I certainly have my days where that level of presence is not there, and I'm just firing off words and articulating myself perhaps in ways that I wouldn't if I was tapped into those states of presence. So
I have so many of those days,
pause.
brother. That is my normal mode of operating. And not to interrupt, but something that I think many people don't take into account, including myself, is that this is a practice. it's a practice, taking a moment to breathe before you speak, or to allow something beyond yourself to flow through you. It's not only something that is achieved by chance or luck. It's something that actually requires work in my eyes, and that work is clearing the weeds within that garden, as we keep on coming back to, doing the necessary work that allows oneself to get out of the way.
Yeah, there certainly has to be that willingness there to step into those greater levels of self-discovery and self-awareness so that we can expand in these regards.
Yeah, completely. Couldn't agree more.
There is a couple of questions that I would love to shoot your way as a bit of a rapid fire closing. But before we get to that, is there anything else that you think is necessary for us to speak on in regards to finding one's voice before we move away from that topic and start to come full circle back to the closing of our container?
I think it's a simple reiteration of much of what we have said, but that you must be patient with yourself, because I have found myself many times comparing or being hard on myself that I have yet to reach a state of openness and clarity to speak as clear as some of those others who inspire me and influence me. And I think the fastest way to slow down your growth towards finding your own voice is by comparing yourself to somebody else's voice. And at least in a comparison that leaves you feeling weak or not as strong in your truest self. So something I'm still working on completely, but something I would certainly strongly recommend to others is to be patient with yourself, be kind with yourself, and know that it's a journey. I mean, I'm 26 years old at the point of this recording. I know that there were many other wise scholars and teachers and medicine men and women and musicians, people of all sorts, who were not where they wanted to be at the age of 26. It's as simple as that. And sometimes I need to remind myself that I may be 75 years old still working on it, and that's completely okay.
No doubt, brother. Yeah. The little quote that came to my mind when you were saying that, and this ties back into what I was saying, and that is that presence precedes patience. Presence precedes patience. If we can cultivate more presence, more self-awareness into our lives, then we can start to understand and start to appreciate and honor where it is exactly that we are on our journeys, and to not be comparing ourselves or having expectations of where we should be, but being able to acknowledge and appreciate exactly where we are, because it's when we come into those levels of surrender and letting go into just who we are. It's from that place that we can create the deepest changes and really find the deepest, most sacred waters that want to come up through the wellspring of our voice, and find our own unique way of expressing ourselves, expressing what wants to come through us, and being able to carry that medicine, our medicine, out into the world, and for it to be a gift for not just the human community, but for the other than human community as well, for our entire planet as an interconnected web of relations.
Oh, brother, I couldn't agree more. It's a sharing of your gift. That's the perfect word for it. Our gift.
So to shoot a couple of rapid fire questions your way, brother.
Please do.
Aside from Masters of Ceremony, awesome. Okay, cool. So I'm interested to know what else that you are curious about right now. What else have you got on the side that you're currently trying to learn?
Interesting. Let me take a moment to think. Well, one thing I'm certainly trying to learn is a balance of how much to share of myself on a public platform, and how much do I delve into some of these crazy stories of my life, specifically centering around plant medicine, because to keep it short, once again, Malidoma Patrice Sommet, a African medicine man, states as well that in Africa there's a belief that if you have a very powerful sacred experience or a very powerful dream, that you do not share it with anybody else other than an elder who can help you maybe decipher this experience, and that there is an inherent loss of potent energy and medicine potentially when you share something in a public manner. So I've been trying to figure out, like, man, there's so many aspects of my life I do want to share, but then I also have certain things that are so meaningful and sacred to me. How do I find that balance of sharing that? That's something that comes to mind right now for sure. Alongside other technical things, I want to become an even better photographer. I want to become a better videographer and editor, and continue to create art in a very intentional but also aesthetically pleasing way. So those are just a few things that come to mind.
And the former certainly ties into the greater theme of what it is that we have been talking about this entire dialogue of finding one's voice. Because when we do, finding one's voice and expressing one's voice is not necessarily about expressing ourselves in all situations, just willy-nilly, as the saying goes. But there is certainly levels of discernment there for myself as well, with knowing what to share and what not to share. And especially in the digital world that we find ourselves in, part of my path has been bringing elements of the sacred into the digital world to try and infuse that level of consciousness into this technological sense of consciousness,
yes.
and have it diffuse in that way to try and plant seeds, since that is such a strong form of our modern day currency, is going to the internet for our learning. So but there certainly is a line for me there, and for myself it's not something that I really think about all that much. It is something that's intuited. It's just like, okay, that's something that I'm just not going to share. And
likewise.
So another question, what's something that you would like to do more of that you're not currently doing, brother?
I would love to sing more. And I have some friends who are probably cracking up laughing right now, because I'm totally like not a natural singer, but I would love to learn more medicine songs. And it is something that I have been practicing over the past year, and something that I am doing. Last night I sang 4 songs to the full moon with my drum that I built recently, and it's something that I'm cultivating, but something that I would love to do way more of. That's like what really is on my mind and heart right now.
When it comes to singing songs, and even singing songs, it kind of dilutes just that phrasing. It dilutes the potency of what that really means to me when I am talking about singing a song. And for me, it's not about a performance when I'm singing a song. It really is a deep communion. And I've been in situations before where people have asked me to sing a song or play something on guitar, but even though that is something that I do regularly, it's not something that I always feel called to do when being asked, because it is a deeply personal thing that arises exactly when it wants to arise, especially within these containers that I was speaking to of stillness and silence, and having it emerge naturally out of there as an offering and diffuse, and then come back into a place of silence and stillness without anyone around perceiving it as some sort of performance. And I wanted to provide that context because in the same breath, I would be absolutely remiss if we were talking about finding one's own voice and I didn't at least ask if there was anything on your end that wanted to come through in the form of song, since we're talking about this.
Thank you. I was expecting that, and I was also expecting to read another poem, rather, because any song that I would sing in this moment would simply be a song that has been written by somebody else. And I don't believe that it is the best use of my time on this show to speak somebody else's words through a poetic or musical way. And I think to close, unless you have another rapid fire question, which I will gladly answer, I would love to share another poem.
I would love for you to finish on a poem. 2 last questions, which I will throw your way first.
Please.
I'm interested in knowing if there are any particular ceremonial or ritualistic practices that you're engaged in on a daily basis when it comes to honoring the sacred, or perhaps even when it comes to this greater theme of expressing one's voice as well. And secondly, just the generic end of the show questions where you might like to direct people so they can follow up with your podcast and your work and all the rest of it.
Of course. Something that I try to do every morning without fail is do some sort of water prayer. So usually I'll wake up, depending on how slow or fast I'm being, I'll get out of bed, I'll brush my teeth, and I'll go outdoors right away without drinking any water. And I will have a vessel of water, either a glass bottle or a jar or a cup. And I will simply express a prayer of gratitude while holding this water to spirit itself, to my ancestors, to certain things that are going on within my life at the time. And use this as an opportunity to simply pray whatever flows through in the moment. But I consciously do this with this vessel of water, and usually always express my gratitude to the element of water itself, and pray that my prayer is solidified and has a clear path to the essence of spirit that I am praying to when consuming this first morning's water. So that is something I've not shared with many people. Sometimes it used to be a pretty elaborate water ceremony every morning that would take maybe a couple minutes, but now it's just become a simple prayer while holding some water and consciously receiving that water in a state of gratitude. And for your other question, people can find me at FifthGod everywhere. That is the name of my website. That is my username on Instagram. You can find me on Facebook at Andrew Askari. I'm sure you will put all of this in the show notes. You can find my music on Spotify or Apple Music or YouTube or any streaming service under the name FifthGod. And yeah, I have a pretty wide portfolio on my website that consists of videos, music, photos, and my podcast, Masters of Ceremony, which you can also follow on Instagram at the Masters of Ceremony.
Perfect. And I can certainly iterate or perhaps reiterate the content curation that you provide and how it comes across as very elegant and very well put together, and you can really feel the integrity that you hold with the work that you're putting out there in the world. So it's very much appreciated, and it's a source of inspiration for me as well, brother. So big props to you, and big thanks again for being here. And I would love for you to close up our little dialogue with this final poem.
Of course, brother. And it is such an honor as well for me to be on this platform, to have you as my brother in this life. And I'm already looking forward to whenever it is the next time we meet physically. I'm sure it will be a grand reunion full of many, many beautiful moments. So thank you, brother.
No doubt.
So to close, This, ironically, was one of those poems that I began writing and completely reached a dead stop, and actually had to write over the course of a couple months, which I just finished a couple days ago. And it comes from, and now we're coming full circle, which I love in the closing of this ceremony, because the inspiration behind it came from this feeling of having mixed ancestry and not knowing or not having a specific spiritual tradition to follow, because I'm a first generation American. My mother is from Jamaica, my father is from Iran, and these are very different traditions, and some of their traditions as well have been lost to the sands of time. So this poem began with feelings of dealing with these sentiments, and transformed into a way of receiving the guidance that I so crave sometimes from my grandparents, who all have now passed, and also elders. So once again, handwritten, so I will take my time reading this. I wish my grandparents were still alive, so I could ask them so many questions. So we could sit together and share stories, because from stories come connection. I would ask them if they remember the ways our ancestors prayed for protection and blessings, directions, and lessons. I'd ask them if they remembered a time when all you needed to see who you were was a brief moment of reflection. I was born what they call a mixed child. Never did know if that was a curse or a blessing. But I had grandparents who had faith in this divine plan and knew that my path would be filled with protection. If my grandparents were still alive, I'd still want to ask them why God had to create such difficult conditions. A young man in a strange land, stripped of his people's traditions. No elders to help explain the complexities of his nightly visions, or how to discern which spiritual laws were true or merely superstition. But I'm sure they would respond, after deep contemplation, that all of these questions have one answer, and that is initiation. Everyone must walk their own path. No teacher will do it for you. In fact, the most helpful teacher you have is the road that lays before you. It's just that I want people to understand that guidance from our elders are worth more than gold. We receive a wealth of nourishment after their stories are told. But in today's society, to us, these people are simply old. And when they invite us to sit by the fire with them, we selfishly choose to remain cold. Until one day it's too late, and we find ourselves in a blizzard of pain, wishing we had accepted their invitations. So now we perform ceremonies and rituals, praying for their visitations. And by doing this, something awakens within us which is ancient and sacred. And we realize that this was their plan all along, but we just weren't being patient. But now they smile and applaud, because despite being gone, they see that we have made it. Back to a land of reconnection where we rejoice and sing in amazement. It's in these moments of remembrance where we honor our relations. And every question we ask is answered without hesitation. I now see that my grandparents are still alive. It is in I where they reside. It is in the sky where they survive. It is in my dreams where they provide. It is in our memories where they can never, ever, truly die. So don't say goodbye, but continue to ask your questions, for it is in you where they reside, as an everlasting remembrance.
A deep breath of gratitude on my end, brother, from some very, very powerful words spoken and expressed. Thanks once again for being on the show, brother.
Thank you so much, Caiyu. It's a real honor and blessing